Right, so you've learned all your chord scales, you have them under your fingers. The only problem is all of your playing sounds a bit like this. So not very jazz. In this lesson today, I'm going to show you one of the simplest and most effective ways of going from scales to jazz that I know of, and it's courtesy of one of the greatest jazz guitarists of all time. By the end of this video, you'll be able to apply this technique to pretty much any tune you come across. Hello, welcome to Jazz Guitar Scrapbook. So everything I'm talking about in this video is available in a PDF which you can get through the link in the description. Let's take a look at this solo from Wes Montgomery. So notice how simple and relaxed he sounds, first of all. It's like he never plays too many notes, even though he's a really exciting guitar player with amazing swing feel and pocket. The notes are actually fewer than you might think somehow, even at burning tempos. So this was recorded the same year as his great record, Smoking at the Half Note, which is one of the all-time jazz guitar records. And as far as I know, basically the record that Pat Metheny learnt to play guitar from. Comparing this to some of his earlier playing on the equally influential Incredible Jazz Guitar, you'll notice that actually it's a bit more modal, right? He's kind of moved a bit more into this world opened up by people like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and obviously this was very much in the air in 1965 when it was recorded. In particular, there's a very Wes way of laying out the Dorian mode, which he seems to particularly like. So what is that? Well, instead of just taking the Dorian mode and playing it in steps like this, for instance, what he does is he kind of misses out every other note. Which gives him this. What is that? Well, technically it's a D minor 13 arpeggio. 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13, and back to root again. So one advantage of this is it is actually it's a chord, it's a harmony, right? So each of these notes will sound beautiful against an underlying D minor chord. And as we go up this ladder, or shape, or whatever you want to call it, we have these more and more colourful notes. So we start off with the basic notes of the triad, then we get a flat 7, and then we get these colourful 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, which gives you a lot of well, colours, basically, a lot of harmonic colours on the chord. And this is something I think it's much harder to hear, at least at first, with a stepwise scale. You tend to gravitate to the notes that you'll probably feel more comfortable with, being like the root, the third and the fifth. And opening up this scale like this into thirds, into an extended chord, gives you a time to enjoy how those colours sound against the D minor chord underneath. And I think it allows you to use these notes very freely. As Barry Harris said, intervallic playing is a lot freer than scalic playing. So you can really explore rhythms perhaps in a way that might be more complicated if you were doing conventional bebop language or something using stepwise scales, for instance. At least I find it that way. Just a little theory note, when we miss out a note like this is called a third, right? A technical note, you'll note the way I'm playing it is maybe quite strange seeming to a lot of people. I think most people might be tempted to do it as a positional thing. And I think if you look at the way Wes plays this, it is very much more like this. Now, you don't necessarily have to wrap your thumb over the top to get the same effect, but something about having your third finger there or your first finger makes it easier to use a little bit of subtle vibrato, and also because you're using this diagonal position, it actually occupies quite a lot of guitar real estate. You're going from down here to up here. You'll notice that quite a lot of the time, if you watch him in videos, Wes Montgomery spends a lot of time down here and then moves along the neck. And actually that's something you can see people like Kurt Rosenwinkel and Pat Metheny do as well. It's a common feature of jazz guitar. Now I've got another video about the three-fingered thing that you can watch, and I know a lot of people get quite annoyed by this. Maybe because they've been taught a certain way and then I'm saying that they're doing it wrong or something, and that's not my intention. It's just another way of mapping out the guitar. But it does seem to be the way that Wes did it himself. Right, so our first tune will be the John Coltrane composition Impressions, which is basically exactly the same as So What, but faster. And this is one that Wes Montgomery played, and you can check it out on Smoking at the Half Note. I think it's a bonus track on the CD release for that. And then if you also have a look at his live broadcasts from 1965, he plays it on there as well. And our two chords are basically D minor, Dorian, minor 11th, minor 9th, whatever, going to E flat in the bridge. So you have like 16 bars of D minor and then 8 bars of E flat minor, and it goes back to another 8 bars of D minor, right? So this is a classic jazz workshop tune for that reason, and I would suggest just mapping these arpeggios over the changes. And you've got another one up here that might be helpful, or this one. Okay, and I would just experiment with using different rhythms and ideas over a backing track maybe. Now, a couple of things that might help. For instance, you'll notice that Wes Montgomery plays a sort of fanfare figure, which I rather like. It's like, you know, fanfare being, you know, like what you might expect on a bugle, for instance, maybe in military music. And he kind of takes it, this sort of idea, and puts it on the extended harmony. So, and as jazz comes from military music, actually originally marching music and marching bands in New Orleans, it's kind of lovely to have that sort of reference back to the roots of the music. It shows how the music has evolved and moved on from those days, but it hasn't drifted out of touch with its roots and its traditions. And you can do the same thing on the E flat as well. There's no rule saying you have to use the whole extended structure. You can just take a bit of it. Yeah. Another thing you can do is you can learn half steps before some of the notes. Which is a little bit of extra spice you can add in, particularly the beginning of phrases. And another thing I like to do is add in sort of scale steps between some of these notes in the extended arpeggio. So particularly between the major thirds. That kind of thing sounds very effective as well. So you're not limited to just playing the notes of the extended chord, but use them as a sort of structure on which to hang your scale on. And actually, because you're then digging into some of these upper extensions, it actually sounds a lot more interesting than just using a standard position if your ears aren't awakened to these different sounds, and this can help you awaken your ears to these sounds by playing. I'm going to show you how to do the other two main chord qualities that we need to get used to, and one of them is major and the other one is dominant. We can understand half diminished as basically being minor. I'll explain that in a second, but let's just focus on the major. So if we take, for instance, C major, I usually just like to go up to the ninth like that. The reason for that is actually the 11th can be a bit problematic. Kind of enough, and we've got a shape up here. This is kind of a nice one. That's quite Wes Montgomery-ish to me. So those are the ones that I'd use for C major. Right, so for dominant we're going to use the altered dominant.
Because jazz.
And this is a little bit different from the other ones, which are based on modes of the major scale, the Ionian major scale and the Dorian mode, which we've just done. This is to do with the melodic minor scale. So the shape I'm going to show you is just this, which fits very nicely with this. Moving to G7 here, so this is G7 with a flat 13, and hopefully you can see how that relates to that shape there. And then further up the neck we have the same notes in this position, and then we can complete it. We've got all the notes of the altered scale if we do that if you want. Although these notes are probably the most common used ones for an altered dominant. Right? And this one is kind of a little bit more scrunchy, the flat 5. Great sound though, if you want to use it. Yeah, very Thelonious Monk. And then we can put all of these sounds together onto a major 251. So we've got the Dorian here. We've got the, that's a D Dorian, G altered, and then C major 7th. Okay, let's do it in a higher position. So I'll start off with the D Dorian. Okay, and then the G altered, and then the C major. Just going up to the 9th for the C major, right? And hopefully you can already appreciate that these sound much better than just going up and down the scales, you know. So let's do a minor 251. So we have the D half diminished chord in the key of C minor, and then we can relate that to an F minor sound, which we can use the same minor 13th sound for that, right? And then for the next chord we're going to use G altered again, and then C minor, so the whole thing together. I mean, how good does that sound? And the next step would be to put it together on a proper tune. So we're going to choose a Jazz Workshop classic, Blue Bossa, starting on the C minor. Okay, then F minor. We use this shape. Classic Wes Montgomery shape. And then D minor 7 flat 5 is the same as F minor really, so we can carry on using F minor. We move to G altered, and then back to the C minor again. Okay, and then we go to our 251 in D flat, so that just means moving our C major 251 up a half step or up a fret. We're going D minor 9 here. By the way, some theory books say avoid the 13th on the 2 minor chord. Don't worry about that, it's fine. And then G altered, and then D major 9th. Then we go back to the half diminished chord, so that's F, and then it's G altered, and then back to C minor. C minor 13th for the last one there. Now you'll notice with that what's happening is I'm taking each one up and down basically, so we're always playing the root. That gets a bit tiresome if you do it in improvisation. So for instance, it's nice to mix it up a bit just to make it sound more musical really. Otherwise you always get, you know, boom, 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 which is what the bass player is playing. You know, so there's no point in always having to double that when you're playing an improvisation over the top. We'll do it up here as well, so C minor. F minor, and then carrying on F minor, and then the altered scale, G altered. Go down to the 6th as well, it's big and clever on the minor chords. And then we go to the major. And then, yeah, that's the A flat altered, and then you can hear how problematic the 11th is there, so we'll miss it out. Yeah, don't be afraid to sort of hang out on those funny notes, the 9ths and the 13ths and the 11ths. Anyway, I hope that helps. I'll play you out with a bit of Blue Bossa.